Lera, tell us a bit about how you have come to be making the kind of work that we're seeing here at Feelium Gallery.
I started exploring a lot these ideas and concepts of confinement, isolation, moving around but also feeling isolated within a room. I've picked up different materials. I started working a lot using my own body, using what I felt like was my own confinement, meaning my own boundaries, my own limitations, to kind of build new bodies and build new shapes and kind of bring into existence what I call these entities.
So you do see them as kind of living
beings? Absolutely, I do, yeah.
The video piece that is part of this whole installation seems to have this sort of excessive zoomed in focus onto edges and contours of the body, folds, bulges. But in the video you seem to be literally layering clay onto people. Is that the starting point for a lot of these pieces?
Often it starts not with other performers, but it starts on my own body. So I start by building little pieces on my body, and then I transpose them to a prop, and then I start to gradually apply more body pressure on this shape. I don't have a fixed image in mind of what it's going to be. It grows by me doing these movements. This kind of works back into my experience, into the experience of my flesh, and then that gets transposed into the sculpture. So it's a bit of an exchange. It's like a back and forth between my body and that body. The reason why the video is so abstract, I think, it's because those are the little kind of details that I take and then put into the sculptures later. So it's not really about how this full figure looks like or what happens to the full figure once this process is applied to them, but more about what this little, inside this universe, in this zoomed in universe of the bulges, the edges, the little kind of crevices and everything that's happening there.
I love that idea because when I'm looking at this work, sometimes I don't know if I'm extremely close, if I'm inside the body even, or if I'm zoomed out and looking at something lying there, a whole skeleton or something. I think you told me that as the sculpture develops, the clay part of the sculpture, it gets more and more brittle, and that seems to connect with the themes that you're talking about here.
There's a lot of falling, being vulnerable, being fragile, solidifying, being strong, standing up, being held. The material, of course, works into it because the clay is initially very soft. It's easy to manipulate. It's easy to mold. Once it gets dry, it gets hard, it gets solid, which weirdly, it makes it more sensitive. It makes it more prone to breaking. They become more fragile.
So this piece obviously quite clearly plays a lot with constricting, opening and closing, revealing. There seems to be a line of pleasure, a line of pain at the same time.
Last year I visited the Museum of the Inquisition in Sardinia, in a small little town. And I think, I don't know if it was deliberate, but subconsciously some of the things that I saw there maybe stayed with me in a certain way. And in the museum there's a lot of apparatuses and machines which were used obviously on women, which were considered witches, and they were tortured to them. Obviously it wasn't just confinement, we're talking about actual pain, we're talking about actual pushing the body to its limits.
And so do you feel like these beings are going through all these experiences as we come and look at them, and of course then are being displayed for us to see?
I feel a little bit, yeah. I feel like they've already been through a lot before they've been exhibited. I feel like that. So the studio process takes quite a long time. Maybe a time frame for each of the sculptures would be 1 or 2 months. That's the time that the sculpture stays on my table and gets morphed slowly into what it is today, and then gets dried and then gets wet again and gets dried again and so on. When the clay kind of dries, it shrinks. So it also kind of the body becomes a bit smaller, it gets a bit within itself, it gets closed within itself. And then, then the installation process kind of takes them to this other level.
That seems to me to connect to some of the writing you've done around this piece, where the idea that these pieces have a sense of longing within them, a sense that they are looking for love, they're looking for care or to be held in some way.
Another impression that I got from someone about the piece is that it looks like a baby cradle. It showed me that people read the fragility, even innocence of like the clay, which is kind of placed into this weird apparatus which is holding it there, like strapped and almost a bit tormented. But the piece itself is fragile and innocent and like kind somehow. If we talk about isolation, if we talk about alienation within a space, within a body, that also kind of implies the opposite, which is that body needs warmth, that it needs care, that it needs kind of, love. Underneath the piece, basically, what's holding those little cushions that are holding the piece are reworked cricket pads from, I think they date back to the 1930s. A lot of people say that the pieces are very feminine. Obviously, there's like what I was saying, there's a lot of exploration of the female and how the female body kind of gets entrapped within certain structures and so on. The cricket pads are actually for males, so they were used to support male bodies. And I kind of like that. I like that also the male can be vulnerable. The male also needs support. Like, although it's a very like, it is associated with femininity, the fact that like the feminine is vulnerable and soft and so on. But also the male is soft. The male can be soft and vulnerable and can need support. And I like that dichotomy somehow, that it works like these, like those cricket pads kind of become almost like a feminine object out of a kind of initially male direction.
That gets me thinking about sort of the memories that we store in our bodies, but also the experience that we have of living in a body and its limitations.
The sculptures themselves are a bit of an externalization of something that's within the body. It's something maybe from within the body that tries to escape, but it escapes in a weird form, in like a different shape, in like a morphological kind of anomaly, if you want, like a little bit of a paradox. I think that's what they stand for a little bit, of like, how do you externalize the interior, try to liberate it from the confines of the limitations of the body, but then it comes out kind of distorted. And I think this is one shape they can have, and I feel like maybe possibly in the future they will have different shapes. All my works so far have been reconfigured, placed in different spaces in a different way. It's hard for me to say this is it, this is the work. And I like that they kind of live through different iterations that they take through different spaces that they get materialized or placed to live in.